what's really interesting is that here, like being a grad student in the US is it's really interesting because it becomes kind of your full-time job. Like not business school. I was in another graduate program before that was research based, so that was very much like work and doing work for university, but then still paying to be there. That's a whole weird concept.
So you did cyborg anthropology, and now you're doing fintech. Well, what's with the?
Oh, okay, yeah. So the whole cyborg anthropology thing and my interest in technology really started in undergrad. I studied archaeology.
This is a really interesting mix of things. I was hoping you would just say like, oh, I watched Iron Man, and I was like, oh, this is cool.
No, so I was studying political science, but with a focus on like culture and an intersection of culture and political science.
Sounds like anthropology.
And so, yeah, and then I also studied. In addition to that, I was in classical archaeology. You know, I had studied ancient Greek when I was younger, and I was really interested in antiquity and the classics. But when I get to undergrad, I discover archaeology, and I'm like, okay, this is actually way more up my alley than linguistics. So I discovered.
Where did you go to? Where did you go for undergrad?
Georgetown in DC. And yeah, so I, fell in love with archaeology. I wrote my undergrad thesis on first century graffiti from Pompeii as ancient social media and how like people leverage technology, which was writing and scribing. And again, it's also like using these tools for communication in a non-literate way, in the same way that we might do things online that are not exactly like literal communication, but they convey something. So what this really is reputation building. It's
ancient memes.
And how. Well, no, it's more like ancient LinkedIn, right? So what happened in Pompeii, in a lot of these sort of wealthy Roman villas, was that they had their walls were covered in graffiti. So signatures mainly of people,
of the sculptors and the
no just anybody, visitors that they've had. So in the same way that you, like today we broadcast our social networks, right, who our friends are, who we tag in our posts, who we're connected with on LinkedIn, we're always sort of, the way we sort of establish our reputation in these sort of virtual spaces is by showing who we're affiliated with. And the way they did that in antiquity was with graffiti, because again, it was a non-literate society. So people weren't like writing messages on walls or things like that. People were like, drawing their insignias. So like, let's say there was a group, like they called them colleges, which were kind of like clubs of laundromats, like of like people who work in the laundry industry, like put their stamp or insignia on someone's wall, shows that that person is supported by this group of people, or like a famous, or some other person has their signature be quite famous, and they put something on your wall, so that when some people, new people come into your life or come in to do business with you, they look around and say, okay, you must be all right, because I recognize some of these symbols. I know who these people are. Like I have friends that are also working.
So it's like it was resume building, really.
Yeah. It was all about reputation, and that was primarily to facilitate trade. And anyways, all of this stuff is what actually got me into blockchain. I was like, that's what got me into consensus. Actually, I was having a conversation with someone who ended up hiring me and was like, oh, this is exactly what what we're like doing for decentralized identity. Like, how can we like use like attestations to build reputation, and what that means for people who don't have like traditional like credit scoring or identity or whatever. Anyways, so archaeology is what made me fall in love with tech, because all archaeology really is studying the built environment. So technology, which is everything in the built environment is technology, to better understand humans and society at given points in time. So then I started to view people and just humans in general as these identities, or these like beings that are kind of inseparable from technology, right?
So cyborg as in not like the sci-fi, but more as like the interaction between humans and technology.
it's a play on that, because I think a lot of sci-fi and a lot of the cyborg trope is often used. Again, I think people have thought about how, we are sort of inseparable from like the technology that we use, and that our identity and what we do in the world is all enabled by technology in some way.
Try taking somebody's phone away. They're not going to want to separate from it.
Yeah. So the way I look at humans and the way I understand my anthropological approach is all anchored in our use of technology and what that says about who we are and what we're in any given point in time. And that started with my with studying the first century, and then that's what got me curious about working in modern technology, because what I identified in my research, like in archaeology, was that, we're using technology for all the same stuff. Like, we still need social network. We're still social networking in these virtual spaces. We still need to curate our virtual identities in some way, and we're using, again,
and these are all still for the purpose of trade.
For the purpose of trade or whatever, right? Branding is not a new thing. And again, like, having this sort of curated virtual version of yourself is something that we've been doing forever. And so that's what got me super, like, again, so that's like what this all comes from. And, there is a field within, primarily within, well, there's science technology studies, which is essentially like anthropology anchored in science and technology. And there's also like within feminism and feminist sort of media technology studies. There's also sort of a lot of research on how technology and also being able to sort of exist in these virtual places has has promised to sort of free women from their bodies and people who've been subjugated. And that doesn't necessarily have to do with gender, but let's say race.
Just whoever is like repressed, oppressed, whoever like are not like at the mainstream of like social discourse or whatever.
Exactly. Or what we say, or how we call it in sort of sociology and anthropology, as the subaltern.
Subaltern?
So the subaltern. So in sort of any dichotomy or any sort of dualism, the one that is below or oppressed or whatever, and that could be the other in other terms, right? And so what's interesting, and like why I was sort of like what got me interested in pursuing this in an academic capacity is like, I was thinking deeply about the internet and text-based social networking, like with live journaling, with Reddit,
threads,
just
forums,
being able to experiment and be a pseudonym, be a word, be words, and what it
be
means
words.
to. You're kind of like, what is the self, and it's like, what is the disembodied self, and how can the self?
And how would you describe yourself to somebody?
Or how would you be, and how would you communicate without having all of these external identifiers that already predetermine how someone else is going to perceive you? So like, you're a woman or you're an Asian man, so I like, I already have my.
How dare you assume I'm one person?
So I have filtering. Exactly. So I already have these filters that are, again, and I think what happens is that we're these filters, they do their job. They certainly filter. And not allow us to sort of maybe in some ways connect directly with one another. So, I was thinking about how, the internet was supposed to enable this. And I think people were super psyched about the internet back in the day with LiveJournal, GeoCities, and whatever. Because people could start experimenting. No, but people could start experimenting and like connect and like be this being outside of the stuff that people may not care about as much. Like I want to identify as a woman, or I may not want to have I'm a woman, so I can just communicate an idea without you filtering it. So that's what got me interested in this,
which
and got me thinking about.
I'd say that also opened up like a new channel of like people kind of like showing how really horrible people are if you don't have all these like if you don't have all these visible external qualifiers.
True, exactly. So there's that, but it's also fascinating to think about we talked a little bit about policing, and I think what's happening with social media now is that I think we're also self-policing and self-regulating in a way that is maybe become a little too unnatural as well. I think right now with how social media is, or without Insta, being live, being in performance mode all the time, and also because in the past, or like like before when I was talking about like in antiquity, people were like inscribing on walls. Like you're kind of still removed from the technology, and you're able to separate the virtual self and the physical self, and like be, like have identities for certain purposes. Like you see my wall, and it's my commerce.
Literal walls.
Literal walls are like for commerce. But now everything, all of the lines have blurred. We're constantly
there's so much abstraction with like everything we're doing now.
Yeah, and it's all this like sort of hyper, vigilance. We're seeing everyone. There's so much what's it called? Surveillance. There's like this surveillance culture where we're
you hear that, the NSA? There's a lot of surveillance culture, wink wink.
Yeah, but I mean, like for me sometimes, like when I think about, like I don't really do, as someone who loves social media, like that's like my like field of interest, and
yet you don't have a Twitter.
I don't.
I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's a very smart thing.
No, because I think about these, maybe I think about them a little too much because I'm just so aware, and again, this is like what I'm studying.